One of the most disturbing elements of the Prohibition War is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows the futility of prohibition and reaches out to educate the community and current law enforcement. Today, the Russ Belville Show visits with another speaker from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition with one clear message. Cops say legalize drugs.
All right, welcome back, everybody. 46 after the hour, and we're joined by Diane Goldstein, one of the board members of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and someone who I know was celebrating last night's victory in California. Hi, Diane.
Hey, Russ. A virtual high five.
High five. There we go.
You know, let me tell you, I think, first of all, sorry that I missed the call last night. It is, I was up at Russian Times News and then went down to Santa Ana we were hoping that the Santa Ana Measure CC would pass. It did not. The city of Santa Ana BB passed, but they still did a very, very hard fought fight. But unbelievable victories for drug policy reformers last night across our nation, from Guam to even Florida. Despite it being a loss, it's a mandate, and it shows the power or the lack of power that law enforcement is finally starting to have. Is we are stripping away at their influence and their lobbying and their lies and their omissions. And I think that's what's so important about everything that happened last night. We're seeing the waning of law enforcement crony capitalism, and we need to continue to push that fight until they're defanged, quite frankly.
Yeah, I know the only major support for the anti-legalization campaign here in Oregon was the Sheriffs and the Narcotics Officers Association, who contributed over 95% of the funds to that campaign. Same was happened up in Alaska. I know Florida, the sheriffs were against the medical marijuana there, and I'm sure in California they weren't too happy about this Prop 47, or was there much opposition to that?
Oh, no, it literally is. Every single law enforcement agency, with the exception of the California Correctional Peace Officers Association, was opposed to Prop 47. And it was interesting, though, is the funding that came from it was mostly law enforcement. The biggest contributor was PORAC, which is more of a collective bargaining union, and not necessarily, even though they have a lobbyist, they've been pretty drug policy reform friendly. They put in like $285,000. The California narcotics officers put in money. But interesting enough, the California police chiefs only put in $5,000 because I think they saw that the writing was on the wall and they didn't want to waste money. But what's interesting is if you go to their press releases they're pouting like little children. Instead of taking this as an opportunity to reach out to people in the community and say, you know what, it's clear that the public has changed their mind about what public safety should be doing. So let's bridge the gap and let's become stakeholders and consensus builders and work to do what's best, not for law enforcement, but for the people that we serve. And I think that's the critical message that I'm going to be pounding on in the next couple weeks. I'm getting to write an article literally for California that talks about how we have stripped them of power in the last 3 years. Obviously California, Prop 47. This last year, LEAP and other drug policy reform organizations killed a badly flawed Senate bill that was introduced by the California police chiefs and by the California League of Cities to be overly restrictive to regulate medical marijuana. We managed to kill that. We've killed 3 zero-tolerance DUI bills that they've introduced. And so we're picking away at their power, and yet we have reached out across the table and said, look, work with us. Kind of like Kevin Sabet. You know, it's like work with us to develop what is responsible policies because, you know, at the end of the day, none of us want, including drug policy reformers, our kids to have access to marijuana. It's how we view the drug itself and how we view harm reduction and the failure of the war on drugs. And so I think that's one of the things that LEAP has been really, really critical about. And our collaborations with you and with, you know, the Drug Policy Alliance and with every major organization that is helping to turn the tide is really significant. It just shows the strength in numbers.
Yeah, it's a wonderful development that's been a great welcome to the drug policy reform movement is having cops on our side, having prosecutors on our side who can speak truth to power on this. And you mentioned Kevin Sabet. It's funny, someone in, I assume Boston, because he's got Beantown in his name, was talking about Kevin Sabet trying to spin Florida as a giant victory for them and using the David and Goliath line again. He spent so much time around those sheriffs, he's learned the stop resisting strategy.
You know what, God, boy, isn't that the truth? Because it's really interesting is if you look at Florida, you know, we can talk about pros and cons about how their campaign occurred and what happened and, you know, strategy and lessons learned. And I think 2016, they'll be back and they'll win.
Yeah.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think that they're going to be more collaborative with other drug policy organizations. Because they'll, you know, I think that they'll know is what we need is we needed Neil Franklin sitting there debating the sheriff instead of John Morgan. John Morgan's good in certain places, but he shouldn't have been everything about the campaign. You know, there should have been patients and more doctors and, you know, other people that were policy people that I think could have really made it would have made up for those 3% points.
Yeah.
And Sabet is so interesting to spin that in that fashion. I mean, I think his quote was, "We've slowed the freight train of legalization down." And it was like, wow, is that comedic relief?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, do you have any concern that in Sheldon Adelson in an article, and I can't remember where this article has stated that he's going to put his money where his mouth is in the next couple years.
Yeah.
And so he is going to be the funder for the anti-movement. And so what we need to do with drug policy reformers, with marijuana activists, and you know, the problem has been is they haven't been known to donate to legalization efforts or to initiative efforts as much. You know, maybe Oregon was a little bit different this year, but in California they haven't. And so if California is going to win in 2016, we need the cannabis industry and we need individual activists to give us money. And even if it's $10, even if it's $4.20 a month, we're going to need somewhere between $15 to $18 million for California to win.
Yeah.
And it's a big deal.
Yeah, and if these businesses want to expand, they need more consumers, and they need that market of California to open up. And, you know, Diane, I got to say, if Kevin Sabet's crowing about a victory where he has a 15-point margin, and that was after spending $4 million, the first time there was ever a negative ad campaign against medical marijuana in a southern state during a midterm election,
yeah,
hell, I'll take that any day.
Oh, you know, absolutely. And I think what we all know is if they would have filed not a constitutional amendment, it would have been an overwhelming victory. And, you know, I hate to say this, but, you know, we can look at the demographics of all the exit polls that came out, is every demographic except for the 65 and older overwhelmingly voted 60% for medical marijuana in Florida. And, you know, I've said this, and, you know, I'm not wishing ill on anyone in any way, shape, or form, but in the next, you know, 2 to 4 years, that demographic is dying off. Mm-hmm. And even conservative Republicans that are younger are much more libertarian thinking, and they support blowing up the drug war. And so, you know, it's I think we're going to make progress quicker than we thought. And then, you know, the other issue is also the evidentiary hearing that happened in California. Yes. You know, so let's see what happens with that, because if we can at least get the federal government, a federal judge, to say marijuana should not be on the Schedule 1, that'll help us perpetuate this momentum and continue to, train kept rolling all night long. It's happening.
Yeah.
And I think people are just sick and tired and fed up of politics, and they're sick and tired of being lied to by politicians and by people in charge, or at least relative to the drug war, because, the elections last night were very interesting. The Republicans upended the Senate and the House, and yet we overwhelmingly voted in marijuana and rolled back. I mean, that's the beauty of Prop 47 is it's the first state to actually roll back the laws. There are, I believe it's like 12 or 13 other states that have the same law, but nobody has ever rolled back mass incarceration like this. And it's, the chiefs and the narcotics officers and PORAC and everybody else are sitting back going, we're so horrified that the election occurred like this, and it's out of state money that isn't going to be here to pick up the pieces of, death and devastation that's going to be caused by this. And yet we know in the 13 other states that crime has not gone up because of this. And it's the same thing with marijuana. It's the same thing with, access to naloxone. And we're slowly but surely, I think, going to win this. And we're going to win it because of alternative media. Not because of mainstream media, because, and I was on RT News last night, we were having that conversation. If it wasn't for people like you and grassroots activists and alternative media that we've managed to spring up because of technology and the internet, I don't think we'd be at the place where we are now. And that's going to be something that's going to continue to drive the locomotive. And it's funny now because you guys are driving media instead of mainstream media driving us.
That's wonderful.
So I have to ask you something. What's next on, the Dollars for Disgrace campaign up in Oregon?
Still raising some funds to hire the lawyers that would have to take us to the lawsuits. I'm at a roadblock where the arbiter of whether or not I can challenge the release of district attorney records in a county is the district attorney in a county. So that has to go to court. I have to take that to court. But before we go, we just have to wrap up here. I want to remind everyone, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, check them out at leap.cc. You can get great speakers like Diane Goldstein and others to come to your events and tell people the truth from a cop's perspective on why we need to legalize drugs. Congratulations on Prop 47, defelonizing possession and other low-level crimes. And I understand there's also a retroactive release part of this. Can you give us that in maybe 20, 30 seconds?
Yeah, literally the only thing that it does is it allows people to petition the court to take a look at their case and see if they can basically get out earlier than anticipated. And so that's, that's going to be a long process as well, because there's a lot of different things that come into it, that they're going to look at people's criminal history and make certain that they're not releasing offenders that are in fact violent.
All right.
So very well done initiative. Congratulations. Very well done in Oregon. I'm thrilled about Alaska, and it's been a good day.
All right. Thank you, Diane Goldstein, board member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. That's all the time we got. I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
Stay tuned. Hour 2 is next. We've got speeches from the Measure 91 campaign party. You can only catch them here on Toker Talk Radio.